just share. Try to make sure that you get sound through, otherwise people can't hear. Here we go.
Your sound is clear.
Okay, Catherine, you can start admitting, okay? All right, people.
Thanks.
Action. On the camera.
There you go. Yeah, it's not that. It's
yeah.
Camera's on.
True.
Hi there, just as some basic housekeeping, if you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself so there's no feedback on the presentation? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start. If you can all just give me a reaction of thumbs up that you can see us. The recording's actually begun, so that's great. And thank you. We've got over 152 people on the session. So we've actually begun. I'm just going to share the screen of the slides. Please mute if you haven't all done so already. Okay, I'll just follow along. So good afternoon. Hopefully you can all see me clearly. My name is Vivine Cameron. I work at the Chartered Insurance Institute and I'll be facilitating the session today. We have a requirement to play what you're about to see next. So just sit back and relax for a few seconds. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. Where I welcome everybody globally to the session today. Firstly, we just want to thank our host ACIN in Birmingham for hosting us in person, as well as their colleagues that have attended today. We'd just like to also point out that equality, diversity and inclusion, as you can see on the screen, values may differ according to the region or country that you are based. We all ought to be adhering to the local legislation and be mindful of the culture of the local community within which we work and live. So we'd just like to share with you and make it known to you that we are very much focused on the UK and London markets as we enter into the conversation, question and answers, and looking towards making sustainable action. So just to make that clear, thanks, Karen. Just to run through what we plan to do in the next hour or so, we have an agenda that has been put together by my team that I've been very happy to work with, so please be welcomed. We have learning objectives for you to undertake, just to make sure that you actually get a sense of feeling that you've learned something, feeling that you can actually do something at the end of the session. We're going to shortly introduce our esteemed panel that have taken time out of their busy schedules to meet with us today. We'll be setting the scene for the discussion that we're entering into. As you can see there from the various points, from media coverage of the murder of George Floyd, do reactionary statements to media stories really turn the dial on improving equality, diversity and inclusion? At this point, I'd like to acknowledge Taryn Johal at ACIN. Taryn had the germ of the idea. We as a collective race and ethnicity team in the UK topic team worked with her to put together this session. So I just want to make that acknowledgement and recognition.
I brought Sonny in to help with the idea.
Sorry, we've just got an internal support here just telling us what's going on. So bear with us. We also have the insurance profession response of conversations to the approaches to diversity and inclusion, which arose on the back of these media events. And we are going to look at the African Caribbean Insurance Network's step change paper, 6 Steps to Racial Inclusion, which has informed the session that we're in today. We're also going to look at what is the result of the ACIN paper and the outcomes, particularly sponsorship, roles and opportunities creations of underrepresented groups. And we also would like to see and talk about the applicability of the UK regulated market of the 2 years on from these media stories and the ACIN paper, the Financial Conduct Authority's Policy Statement 22.3, which some of you may be aware of, that's required for certain listed companies from April of this year, with steps to address. We're going to have some time for Q&A, so you do get involved. We're going to revisit the learning objectives for those of you that are using the session for continuing professional development, and then we're going to have a call to action where you get involved and have something to do to just progress and take this further. So go through some housekeeping, which we have already covered for those of us in person, but just for health and safety and facilities, for those of you in person, they know where everything is. They need to know what to do in the case of an emergency. Just to say, this session is for you, the attendee and participant, and it's about you, so do ask as many questions as you'd like. Take the opportunity to do so. If you are in person, please mute your mobile phones, cell, handset or portable devices. If you're online, kindly mute your microphone if it's not done so automatically. Ensure that your speakers are working if you're listening through your speakers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, or if online, raise your hand function. My colleague, Catherine Kennett, will be managing the chat box. And you may also post questions in the message box or the chat box as and when. And just finally to say, the views, thoughts, opinions expressed by the professional panel are of the panel. Those of you that are using this session for your personal and continuing professional development, we do have some learning objectives we'd like to apply to this session. So by the end of this session, we believe you should be able to describe the insurance profession's organisations, conversations and approaches to equality, diversity and inclusion. You'll be able to identify or describe and perhaps even think more carefully about ACIN's 6 Steps to Racial Inclusion. We also hope that you will be able to identify and describe, perhaps even summarise the FCA Policy Statement requirements for certain listed companies. And finally, we'd like you to identify a personal commitment to support EDI in your organisation. So those are the learning objectives for the session. So this is the point where I stop talking. I'm going to introduce myself, and then as is displayed on the screen, the panel will take a minute to introduce themselves and where they work and the capacity that they are on the panel today. So I'm Vivine Cameron. I am the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Chartered Insurance Institute. For those who are unaware, the CIA, or Chartered Insurance Institute, is a professional body for the insurance and financial planning profession. Okay, moving on to Manraj.
Hi everyone, I'm Manraj Ubhi. I'm legal counsel at Tokio Marine Kiln, so I work in the legal team. But I also have another role, which is chair of the Ethnicity Network group at Tokio Marine Kiln.
Moving on to Maxine.
Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Maxine Goddard, representing Sompo International today. I lead distribution at Sompo International. I'm very much involved in a lot of D&I work across the industry. This is my 8th year of dive-in, so I'm excited to see so many of you are still joining these calls, over 200 of you. I sit as co-chair on the Rattle Race Action Through Leadership for senior leadership in the industry, and various other committees. Delighted to be here.
And moving on to Ebenezer.
Hi, I'm Ebenezer Asmah. I work for Travellers Europe. I am here representing the ACIN as well. Relatively new into the insurance industry. Well, I've been in the insurance industry for about 3 years. Internally at Travellers, I'm a deputy chair of our Black Allies and Employees Network, and I'm heavily involved in inclusion work at Travellers as well. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Ebenezer. And moving on to, I have apologies from short Mwatu, who's called away for business. So moving on to John Bissell, my colleague.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. John Bissell. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Chartered Insurance Institute. Obviously Vivine's just described what we do. And fascinating to hear, Ebenezer, you just entered into the insurance profession. Welcome, I've been in it for 35 years, so that's my duration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment or two.
Thank you, John. And moving on to Nikita. Nikita's actually in person, so she's going to project her voice for you so she can be heard.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nikita Allen. I'm here in capacity as the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Officer on behalf of the Birmingham Insurance Institute. Professionally, I work for Clyde & Co, which is a national and international law firm, and my employment there is as a paralegal in catastrophic loss.
Fantastic, thank you, Nikita. And then we have Sam Adelaja, who is representing Sajida Karim from Ernst & Young, who, due to business pressures, was unable to join us today. So welcome, Sam, and do share about yourself.
Hi, thanks all. Thanks. So I'm Sam Adelaja. I've worked I work for Ernst & Young, been there for about 13.5 years, and before that I was at Barclays for about 20 years. So overall about 25 years in the industry, mainly specialising in transformation delivery for financial services organisations. Again, mainly banking, but I've also managed big programs for insurance firms and wealth and asset management firms too. I'm also a design, equity and inclusion lead for our transformation capability at EY. And as Vivine has said, I'm in here in place of Sajida Karim, who's a partner within our FS risk and regulatory area, but she also leads the race agenda for EY's UKFS consulting service, which I support on as well. So thanks for having me.
That's fantastic, thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. Welcome everybody in the room. This is a very open session, and we really want you to get involved in the discussion. I'm just going to set the scene. So, as I've mentioned earlier, for media coverage of the murder of George Floyd, do reactionary statements to media stories really turn the dial on improving EDI? So you can see in front of you that we pulled a number of images from the BBC, predominantly the BBC News website, but also Black Lives Matter march that took place throughout, well, in the US principally. And what we were discussing as a team, and something that's been drawn to our attention, is that many organisations put out statements in relation to people of colour, of how they were going to support and be allies to empower and drive out racism. And different actions were taken, and some actions brought about change, and in some instances little has changed. So this is the point where I asked the panel to share in their respective organisations, from their respective perspective, different networks that they work with, what actually happened 2020, where have they been, what have they seen, and what do they see for the future? So we'll start again, as we did with the previous panel, our prompting as to who will be speaking. So we'll start with Manraj. Do share with the group what the position was from your perspective, and what is life like now, and what you suppose for the future.
Sure, thank you. So I guess before I start, the first thing I'd like to mention on this, and probably something that is and act as a precursor to everything I say, is that ultimately what we're trying to do here is shift the narrative. We're trying to get people to think about things in a certain way, and think about things in a way in which they may have not done so previously. With that in mind, following on from everything that happened with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and the massive movement we saw across the world, at TMK we saw something very similar. So that started off as direct communications from our CEO and exec team, kind of explaining the issue, but portraying the issue and really bringing it to light, and showing the rest of the business how something like this has caused a kind of seismic shift in the narrative with respect to this. And I think that was the first thing that took me back personally, because I've worked at a few different organizations now, and I always find when you get that direct communication from your CEO and exec team, it does go a long way in helping to address the issue, because it does bring it to the fore. And obviously, as things do in any organization, they always trickle through, and certain sentiments kind of trickle down throughout the business when they're being expressed right at the top. That was the first thing I would say in relation to that, and that's the first thing that struck me at TMK, was how open and honest, and how clear the exec were, and what their position was at personally, and what the position was at TMK, which is obviously the positive one. And then what we saw there, and through a lot of the work that I was doing, especially last year with the Ethnicity Network group at TMK, was, again, like I said before, helping to shift the narrative. So the way we approached it was looking at it from two perspectives. We're looking at it from the direct perspective and the indirect perspective. What I mean by that is, from a direct perspective, we looked at doing things like organising events, talks, certain initiatives that people could see when they're in and around the office, collaborating with certain charities, and filtering that through the comms sector. So those are things that people could actively engage with on a day-to-day basis, and kind of see what's going on within the business. But then the other thing, and the thing that I'm probably more proud of at TMK, what we've been able to do is focus on the indirect things. So things like our ethnicity pay gap, I think, has gone a long way in kind of helping to bring to light certain issues that were kind of brought to the fore initially from Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. So helping to essentially quantify the issue through our ethnicity pay gap is something that we've been able to do. We're actually issuing our second statement this year, which has been more positive than it was last year, which is great. And as I said, essentially what we're trying to do is help to bring to light some of these issues from a different perspective. So as opposed to telling someone there's this systemic issue within financial services, within London, whatever, for some people, when you just show them some of the raw data, they can actually see for themselves that there are some numbers that don't quite equate. In a similar vein to what's been done with the gender pay gap, and kind of good work come across as a result of that. So that was probably the proudest thing I'd say that TMK have kind of been involved in. And I wouldn't necessarily say it was a direct result of everything that happened, because I think that would be unfair to everyone that did a lot of good work for a long time to get that over the line. But it definitely did help, right? And going back to with the statement there, does it help to turn the dial? I would say it definitely acted as a catalyst to bring these conversations a bit more forward and bring them to the fore and have them at the top of the agenda. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention at TMK, and something that I'd highly recommend, if you are able to kind of think, have these discussions within your organization, is that we got a consultancy come in and basically did a holistic review of our entire process from a D&I perspective, focusing mainly on ethnicity for now, but across the board. And what that involved was, consultants coming in, having conversations with loads of people in the business, the exec, senior leadership team, and it really helped kind of draw out, certain topics or certain themes, and that people may not want to talk about, even with colleagues or in public. Are more comfortable to speak to a consultant because they're a quote unquote external. And from that, we've been able to drive a bunch of different initiatives, which has meant that we're now in a position where we know what we need to do. We've made some good tangible progress already, but we can kind of see what the next step is. And I think that's probably the point I want to finish on, is just because you make certain progress in one respect in relation to one thing, this being ethnicity for us, doesn't mean that you kind of stop there. You kind of keep having to focus on making sure that you keep momentum throughout these things. So I guess the other thing I'd like to mention is making sure that what we've been able to do at TMK is make sure that we always have that next peak that we can kind of address, and that next objective. So yeah, a combination of all of those things, I would say, as I said before, wasn't necessarily a direct result of what happened with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Some of them were, but as I said, some of the more intangible, indirect things were definitely things that I think would be more proud of at TMK.
Thank you, Manraj. We're going to move on now to Maxine. So Maxine, please take the floor.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And good to hear, Manraj, that TMK has published a pay gap. Where do I begin on this question? I mean, 2020 was a pretty intense year for racial activism, without a doubt. It did feel as if we were turning a curve, without a doubt. We were making small steps forward, but it was small and important steps because, years and years of activism, and we were seeing little movement. And that was, evidenced by all those listening groups we were hearing from people during 2020, from our colleagues and people within the industry and outside of the industry, that racism was pretty systemic, right through from recruitment through to career development. And we need to do something differently. And I always describe the journey is a pretty long journey. It's probably 100-year journey. If you think of gender, from the suffragettes to now, gender is 100 years later still fighting. And so on racism, it's probably another year, 100 years, 150 years plus of a journey still to cover. And so when I hear people talking about diversity fatigue, I smile, because you might be tired now, but we're just at the beginning of the bell curve. There's a long journey ahead, and we shouldn't take our foot off the gas. Were there reactionary statements? Absolutely. Silence was not an option. You needed to react. It was a shame it's reactionary and not proactive, but we'll take what we can. What we felt during 2020 was that not only was there increased awareness, but there was something magical happening, and that was empathy. You were getting more empathy from your senior leaders and your colleagues and the wider society. So having reactionary statements were important, very key, because the message needed to be sent out that the industries that you're in were taking racial discrimination seriously. I joined the industry over 20 years ago now. I came in from Barbados, best education, middle-class background, excellent grades. I already had my degree, and I felt the racism. In fact, when I first joined the industry in the UK, I was given this foreboding warning that, the English like dogs more than black people. And that was kind of planted in my head, and it resulted over the years, I wouldn't have a dog, I'd have cats. There were always microaggressions. When I joined the industry, I remember being at a dinner, And, I had to quickly make a mind up. Do I use a fork or a spoon or a knife and fork to eat some spaghetti? I just hesitated for 5 seconds because in Barbados, we use a knife and fork to eat spaghetti. And a senior leader next to me thought it was important to point out to the table that his 3-year-old knows how to eat spaghetti. No cultural point in his mind that, actually, people eat differently in different cultures. And that was like a small thing that always niggled with me over the years. But coming closer to now, and the reason why I've been so involved in D&I and EDI efforts is that something personal happened, and I was pretty surprised and shocked at it when my senior leader said to me, I didn't get a position. This is going back maybe 7 years now, and they might be on this call. Apologies if you are, but no names. Pointed out that I wasn't white, I wasn't male, I wasn't European, and therefore I didn't get that job. And they were being completely real about it because I'd known them for a few years and they just wanted me to understand what the position was. And so this is recent memory, but it's something that, we all need to take seriously. It's a journey, or societies are diverse. There's no going back on that. Is how do we go forward? And I'm not talking about immigration. I'm talking about people who are born, bred, educated, socialized here. And whether it's the UK or the US and other countries joining the call, racism is felt by your colleagues, and we need to understand that. So I was delighted when 2020 happened because, as bad as it sounds, I was glad that, there was increased empathy coming from colleagues and senior leaders, and it was so important. So reactionary statements, they might sound as if, that's not ideal. It doesn't really move anything. I'd argue that it does. It's an important step. We'll take what we can get. The journey's long. If it's 1,000 steps, this is a step forward. And we know that we need to go forward. So I'm glad that we've got more allies on board now. We're more intentional and purposeful. Our senior leaders are recognizing it's discussed at the board now. We'll talk about the FCA soon, but certainly, with the FCA putting pressure, then what gets measured gets done. So I'm delighted that, we can actually openly and honestly have these sort of discussions without holding back. When I came on board with these D&I, a Black lawyer had messaged me and said, are you sure you're going to be so high profile on this? Maybe you need to get a lawyer. This is 7 years ago. You didn't come out and talked about it. My colleague, very dear friend, C-suite Black woman, her CEO only 2 years ago said, step back from all that D&I effort because it's career limiting. So these are some of the real conversations that happen. I'll take the reactionary statements because there's a lot that we still need to do. And awareness and education and training is key. I'm delighted the 6 steps, are here to give us the tools and help us understand what we need to do. So I'll pause there.
Maxine, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. We are now going to move to Ebenezer. So if you'd like to take the floor, sir, that'd be great.
Yeah, so at Travellers, similarly to Manraj and Maxine, I think one of the key things that our company recognized very early on is that there's primary and secondary impacts to the events of George Floyd. There was primary impacts to those that were based by our US colleagues, and there was also secondary impacts to those that were based here in the UK, and as well as Ireland and other countries as well. So our senior leadership was really proactive in just making sure that we felt the support. They made their time. We had listening groups where there were black members of the Black community, both not only here in the UK but in the US, that were able to discuss their frustrations or their feelings about the events. And the senior leadership team listened. There were actions that were put in place. There were things that were done and still being done to this day. I think one of the key things to acknowledge around reactionary statements, that reactionary statements are only impactful if there's more to them than just words. There has to be action, and change has to be sustained to see a positive impact on diversity and inclusion. However, unfortunately, these things don't happen overnight, but we have to recognize that we're building for the future. So that means maintaining a talent advantage by increasing the diversity of our sourcing pools. So increasing the diversity and inclusion has to be a business imperative for all of us. By creating a welcoming environment that brings together people from different cultures and perspectives, we will enable new ideas, innovation, and a culture in which our employees will feel valued, respected, and supported. However, aspiration alone will not help you to retain talent. So offering opportunities to progress is also vital. And the industry needs to consider what tangible resources can be provided to help their employees succeed.
Thank you, Ebenezer. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to move on now to John. So John, if you'd like to take the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivine, and wow, so far, absolutely fascinating. Thank you for those insights. I'm going to, if you'll indulge me a little bit, I'm going to try and just weave in various aspects of the agenda, a bit about my experience and a bit about what the CII is sort of doing, I guess, from a kind of practical perspective. I've got a few notes, if that's okay. I might refer to those. But so, as at the outset, I said, 35 years in insurance profession. It's actually over 40. I've just worked out. So that's a bit scary. I missed some years somewhere. So look at me. I'm probably a stereotypical person in the insurance profession, or at least I think I was. Having joined the profession when I was 18 back in the early 80s, from a kind of probably white lower middle class background, virtually all of my managers, directors were all white males like me, and it was probably no wonder that my sights were set on being more like them, in this particular profession, and they were fostering more people like them as well. So there were many people like me, quite honestly. There were some women, absolutely, and some actually who are now very prominent in the insurance profession and themselves very prolific advocates of diversity and inclusion. But I've never seen myself as biased. I've now got members of my extended family who are close friends who are black, gay, non-binary. But it was in the early 2000s, actually, first of all, when I was privileged to become a mentor to the black business brokerage community in London, which was set up to help young black entrepreneurs. And I first heard and saw firsthand the challenges faced in the workplace, and it was just shocking. In particular, my mentee, who was a single mum trying to set up a strategy consultancy business, very difficult, almost impossible. But today I'm delighted to say that she's now running a thriving business advising others on how to get going, and has won awards and published books on the subject. But what's that? That's all very well, but what's the relevance to today's session? It was all a bit remote to me, actually, until then, a bit arm's length. So when I see things like the 6 Steps paper, an excellent strategy, logical, practical steps set out by the network, sponsored by the great and the good. But the reality is, for me, we have to kind of feel the challenge, not just kind of, hear about it or read about it. We have to tell the stories of fear and anxiety, because that's what I heard, and that's what really, moved the dial. And they're all very close to home, as you just said, just around the corner, just in our own backyard. And when it comes to Black Lives Matter, an example at the CII was one of our colleagues, and Vivine and Catherine will know, attended a Black Lives Matter protest in London, and it was a peaceful sit-down protest, and it was almost kind of carnival-like. And clearly, although in the main it was an uplifting day for her, even that person, as a black female, had her eyes opened, even now, with some of the kind of clashes that occurred and some of the underlying fear that they would encounter counter protest groups looking for trouble. And the important thing is the important thing about that story, I think, is that my colleague was prepared to share her personal experience with us all rather than brush it under the carpet. And that's really made the difference as far as, you know, me and my colleagues and the activities at the Chartered Insurance Institute as a professional membership body, you know, encouraging and advocating professionalism in the insurance profession. So I've got some examples of how the CII is approaching D&I through a couple of lenses, what internally and externally. You know, how can your professional membership body talk about and advocate D&I in the business and financial planning profession without looking at itself first? You know, walking the talk, because I think that's really what it's important to do. And me as an executive and a board member, you know, need to lead by example and from the top. So it's aligning to the 6 steps, I think, as well as the FCA policy. So we welcome that policy. You know, we've got, in terms of the board makeup, 40% are women. One of the senior positions is held by a woman. We've got members who are from a, you know, an ethnic minority background. So, you know, in a way, we're kind of, you know, getting there, hopefully. But CII is a small business, and, you know, actively supporting, continue to improve on the diversity of recruitment and other activities. So, you know, yes, we've made steps to becoming more inclusive, further strides needed. We are committed to sharing good practice, meet customer needs for being an inclusive business, ensuring recruitment campaigns for the CII board and its committees and employees are positioned for, you know, to grow a new and diverse representation. The recruitment process ensures candidates are represented for all key positions from all backgrounds. We mandate against unconscious bias training for all employees with an increased focus on racial prejudice, you know, certainly as a result of George Floyd. And we promote and support apprenticeships to encourage new and young talent from all minorities into the profession. We've got an annual D&I programme supported by our People Inclusion Group, LBGT+ advocates and our wellbeing champions. And obviously upcoming in October, you know, we're strong supporters for Black History Month with various activities, events, and increasing the profile through exhibitions and importantly stories of Black icons for everybody to share and to learn about and understand better, because it's those, I come back to that point, it's those practical stories and examples and personal experiences, I think, that will genuinely help to continue to move the dial. And as my panelist said earlier on, it's a very long, you know, journey indeed. Briefly, what about externally? We've taken steps to ensure the research that we undertake uses the lens of ethnicity. We work on public trust agenda, and that underpins some of the corporate objectives, and the data that's collected on ethnicity as well as gender and age is important in that work. And just last week, and it's not an advert for this because this is open source, but just last week we launched our professional map, and it's available to all members and non-members, cii.co.uk. And the professional map is a career development tool that enables you to identify training needs and prepare for things like appraisals, career development and planning, job applications, progression. But at the heart of it, importantly, are the competences you need to succeed in the workplace to meet business goals and drive customer outcomes. That includes behaviours, it includes technical expertise and enablers. But under the behaviours framework, importantly, is a section on diversity, and it seeks to focus on, among other things, to ensure that, you know, respecting, drawing on the strengths of different individuals, and ensuring there are processes to increase equality and diversity and inclusion are there. And I commend everyone to have a look at the professional map to see how that might work for you. So as I say, you don't need to be a member of the CII. Finally, very briefly to the public, Vivine. CII is there to build public trust in insurance and financial planning. And This is achieved largely through creating more member professionals who serve the public. And it almost goes without saying that the public is diverse, and therefore the profession needs to understand and respect that diversity as well, ensure that attitudes, products and services meet the needs of all members of the public. And this is the essence of professional standards and the profession that we are all in today. Just quickly, I wanted to finish on a quote from our former CEO, and it says, "We all know we are not yet where we need to be as a profession in terms of our diversity. We're not yet representative of the population we serve, and that means we're missing out on vital sources of talent, as well as making it hard for us to see through the eyes of our customers." I see huge efforts by many across the sector to change this, with festivals such as Dive-In, representative networks and outreach campaigns to change perceptions, learn from each other and drive action. We're committed to holding up the mirror to our profession and working with all those who share our determination to expedite change, measure progress, identify barriers and share good practice. Each organisation will have its own challenges and approaches to overcoming them, but I hope over time to help us step forward as a profession, learning from and challenging each other to open up more rewarding opportunities for more people to serve our customers. I want to leave the profession in a very different place from a diversity and inclusion perspective than it was when I joined in 1980. We're making great strides. Let's keep those experiences, those examples coming to the fore, and we can all understand and take action accordingly. Thanks for being.
John, thank you. I'm going to endeavour to do something technical. We've had technical challenges here in-house, so I'm going to try and enable Nikita to join via my handset. That's not looking like it's going to happen immediately. Bear with me. No, perhaps not. Nikita, do you just want to start and I'll try and connect you so that everyone can see you?
Sure. So, as I said initially, I'm part of the BII, Birmingham Insurance Institute, which is the second largest institute in the UK. So it's run by elected members, council members and the young professional, affectionately known as the YPs. So all run by volunteers, and all of us as part of the BII want to give something back to the profession in terms of insurance, and myself through law. We give back in terms of education, development, support and network, and because Birmingham is so diverse in terms of its demographic, we need to appreciate and also embrace the diversity that we have. Looking at the ACIN paper, and particularly point 4 in terms of creating a culture of inclusion, I just wanted to have a look at point 4, which is raising awareness of complexities in terms of racial prejudice, and particularly what has also been mentioned previously about microaggressions. These are what are commonplace daily verbal or behavioural or environmental slights. So it can be anything which is either intentional or unintentional. And these are used to communicate a negative bias or attitude towards a member of a marginalised group. So I'll give you some examples. So say a black woman's hair. People have a tendency to touch without consent. It can be seen as if you're petting an animal. Some people have said you don't expect it to be soft. People have seen that it's not professional if natural hair is used or worn, and people can be taken, not be taken seriously in business settings. You can also be asked the question, where are you from? Or where are you really from? That underlying tone is the assumption that you don't belong, that maybe you're foreign or that you shouldn't be here. And following the death of George Floyd, the expression of Black Lives Matter became more prevalent. But then this was also countered with the argument of all lives matter. But what does this mean? It means that there was a failure to recognise the disproportionate impact on certain groups in terms of systemic racism. But does it really matter? It's all said in good humour, it's all banter. Is it really harmful? And who is responsible for the ultimate change? In isolation, it might seem harmless, but there is a saying, death by 1,000 cuts. Its cumulative effect leads to reduced confidence, anger, depression, lower productivity, psychological impact, and it leads to undermining trust and barriers to inclusiveness, which we want to break down. So really then, who is responsible? We all are. Consciously or unconsciously, we all have some kind of bias. So what can we do as groups or individually? We need to be prepared. One, to discuss the issues of race, because it's difficult and it's often seen as something to avoid. But then we need to ask difficult questions and ask for anonymous feedback, but it needs to be honest. We're likely to get criticised by not doing enough, but we can't take this personally. The issues are bigger than we ourselves. Individually, what can we do? We need to have a self-analysis and be honest and look within and challenge ourselves. So we need to educate. Think about the day-to-day experiences that Black and marginalised groups experiences. And if we don't understand these issues, maybe sign up to webinars, podcasts, and maybe diversify our media. So watch Black films, TV, books, or just the old-fashioned way of speaking to people to get their experiences. In terms of groups and businesses, what can they do? It's going to take time, but importantly, you need to commit. This comes from the senior leaders. You need to be prepared for the challenges, but some views, as is mentioned previously, views are strongly entrenched. People don't like to change. But CEOs and senior leaders need to be prepared to give vocal support to the changes that need to be made. The CEOs are the drivers for the business, and they give direction to where the business is going to be run. If they're not prepared to drive a business forward in a positive light, the business is going to suffer as a result. You can't see hiring Black or marginalised groups as a tick box exercise. It's more important than that. CEOs need to ask themselves, where do they want their business and what do they want their business to be recognised for? The business is only as strong as its leader. Clear action is needed with purpose. You need to be prepared to get ongoing and consistent training. That's very important. But also you need to get your hands dirty, so to speak. Is it harmful? Is it just banter? Clearly not. From what we've seen from all the comments so far, whether it's intended or otherwise, it can do a significant amount of harm. From a personal example, when I was just leaving school, I wanted to be a chef. So part of my work experience was going to the International Convention Centre for 2 weeks and working in the kitchen area. And I spoke to 2 Black women who took me under their wing because I was so young, 16 at the time. And I expressed my desire to want to be a chef, particularly pastry chef. And I was told, well, they laughed and said, it's going to be impossible. They gave me 2 reasons. One, I was a woman. Second, I was Black. And they just says, you should change your profession now. And unfortunately, I took their advice and I went into law instead. But the negative connotations to those 2 statements have stayed with me for 25 plus years. In terms of what my business does, Clyde & Co, I've only been with them for a short period of time, but I know from looking and investigating on their commitment in terms of race and equality, they've signed up to a number of firm-wide initiatives to include the Rare Race Fairness Commitment. That was in June. They deal with reverse mentoring. They have a global steering group. They also have an academy which was set up in 2021, which enables Black and marginalised groups to have new skills, develop new connections and mentoring. There are also a partnership in the HALO Code, which is the UK's first black hair code, which protects employees who have come to work with natural hair or hairstyles as part of their culture. So what now? You're probably feeling a bit overwhelmed in terms of what to do, where to go, how to progress your desire to want to change. So really, we need to respect others' views and their lived experiences, because everyone's is different. In a professional capacity, everybody has a duty to respect each other. But changes need to be practical, and they also need to be sustainable. It's important that when we have the desire to change, we want to grow, improve and implement. We need to recognise that this issue is not going to go away, and if we don't change now, we could unfortunately be left behind. So for those who want to develop, we can sign up for webinars, training groups, or sign up to sponsorship organisations and attend event planning discussions to help us to progress.
Nikita, thank you so much. Just conscious of some of the questions in chat. We are meant to be on slide 8 because we are discussing post the impact of the murder of George Floyd and the panel's experiences in their respective organisations. Our last speaker will be Sam Delegated. Sorry, Sam, I just butchered your last name. Apologies. But if you'd like to just take the floor and just address currently what the position is from your organisation's perspective, and also we'll move on to you on the next slide to talk to or speak to about the FCA. We'll just hold the current slide for now, but Sam, if you'd just like to address as the rest of the panel has, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like I think has been said before, a lot of very interesting and insightful and powerful statements. I've worked, as I said, worked for EY for about 12 and a half years now, and I certainly have been I've been involved in the whole diversity and inclusion as it was at the time, and the progress that or the kind of steps we're making to improve that. But the events of 2020 was certainly a surge, I think, as everyone has kind of testified to. And for us, we within EY, there is a number of networks, communities, and one of these is the Race and Ethnicity Network, which often came together to discuss various topics. Could be generational differences and what we need to think about that, and how we respect different cultures and how they respect their elders, for example. And that was I believe the topic of discussion around the time that George Floyd was murdered. And we all came into that session, and it was quite clear we only had one thing on our mind. And the chat on the side of the presentation started to blow up with comments about what had happened. So another session was put in place, and I think a word cloud was set up to kind of people to convey their feelings, how they were feeling. And just to, I guess, to Ebenezer's point, I think that was the first step that the organisation made, was to listen to what their people are thinking and how they're feeling at that time. And it was quite incredible, some of the comments that were coming out, not just how they were feeling about what happened, but also the experience, their experience in EY in terms of, you know, whatever racial or racial related experience that they were having. And it was surprising a lot of our leaders, not just in EY, obviously other organizations as well, but when you give people the voice and you open your ears and you listen to them, it's incredible the stories that actually do come through that may have been assumed not to be taking place. And I think that just triggered, again, the leadership to be a lot more, the antennae were up, and they were kind of, what can we do about this? So they very, very quickly, I think, along with a lot of other corporations, set out a number of anti-racism commitments. They kind of talked about the targets that were being set around DE&I, and they wanted to laser focus on, particularly on like the proportion of black partners they have at the firm, and how they need to increase that within the next few years. And they kind of set targets around that and started to set a number of actions related to that. So that training was another big thing. So there was this course that they set up called Let's Talk About Race. Again, that's all about engaging in the conversation about racism. As mentioned before, it's a difficult topic. It's multidimensional. It's not what everyone thinks that it is. It's got many nuances about it. So what one person might think is racist is, it could be, might not be. It's different to someone else. So it's important to engage in the conversations around it. I myself have had to encourage some of my Black and Asian colleagues to go onto those courses, so that at least they they can understand what their white colleagues are now going onto those courses and picking up in terms of the definitions, and are able to then to engage in effective conversations. And I've also heard of some of my Black and Asian colleagues who are kind of saying, well, psychologically this is tough. It's, again, to bring ourselves to talk about racism to our white colleagues, that's a big ask. But frankly, we are going to have to do that. We have to encourage that conversation to happen, and we need to encourage our white colleagues to get involved in those conversations. In our team, we set up just small conversations between maybe 5-6 people, predominantly white colleagues, and then myself and maybe another Asian colleague, and we'll just talk about general topics in the news about racism, or race related. So the big one was, well, one of the ones was about the increase in diversity in UK adverts and how people have taken to that. What has that meant for people? It is quite disruptive in some people's minds, and we were kind of trying to explain why that is, and how the norm, as you might have seen it, is an imbalance to other people, and when you redress that balance, obviously to someone else, that looks very, very strange, very different. But it's the conversations. So that was really important. And then importantly, the last thing I'll touch on is what we called a Black Talent Review. So within our area of the organisation, there was a laser focus on the Black colleagues and how they were performing in the kind of throughout the year, and then how they were being assessed for either promotion or not, or progression or not, against their other colleagues. And where it was seen, well, someone's been languishing, it seemed, in a particular grade for a number of years. What's going on there? Kind of get their counsellors on board. What support do they need? What actions do we need to put in place? What is the potential of this colleague, and how can we make sure that they fulfil that potential? So that was an important thing that's been running now for the last 2 years, and it is seeing good results. Or certainly, we're seeing better performance happen out of that. And then lastly, I'll touch on just allyship. So that's an important but growing part of the firm's ethos around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that is to increase the number of allies that we have across the organisation. Again, fostering greater relationships between our white colleagues and colleagues from our Black or Asian backgrounds.
Sam, thank you so much, and I want to thank all our panellists. We're going to move on to the second setting the scene. So you've heard a lot about the ACIN paper. It's been made reference to by a panel, and it was a game changer in our profession of insurance. And you may be listening to all our panellists wondering, okay, I've heard the challenges. What can I do? What can my organisation do? So this is just one of many things you can do as an organisation, and maybe you're a small, medium enterprise employer wondering what you can do. I'm going to touch on the 6 steps. Know and share your targets. So develop and track and report ethnic diversity metrics. in areas of representation, recruitment, retention, promotion and pay gaps. Some of the panel have touched on some of those targets. Be committed, ensure ethnic diversity throughout the organisation is built on and get commitment from senior leadership, and we've heard that explained and described through some of our panels. Also recruit for now and the future. Again, the panels touched on that, improving ethnic diversity among employees at all levels and build a pipeline of opportunity for the future. 4, create a culture of inclusion. You've heard some of the things that have been done at the CII with employee resource groups and in other organisations represented by the panel. We've talked about training and development, so use proven HR tools to embed diversity in minds and processes. The panel have touched on some of that. And we're going to move on to the next thing, which is about sponsor, partner, support and donate. So moving on to the next slide, you'll see something else that you want to talk about in terms of setting the scene, of giving you practical steps of what you might do as an organisation. Now, as a result of the ACIN paper, one of the outcomes was sponsorships in terms of roles and opportunities for the creation of opportunities for underrepresented groups. On the slide, you're going to see a number of different sponsor levels that the ACIN engaged with different organisations, gold, silver and bronze. There are various permutations of how they've made commitments to change how things will actually work in terms of underrepresentation in the profession. And then moving on now, 2 years on, we saw in April that there has been the FCA Policy Statement 22.3, which some of the panel have made reference to, about the requirements for certain listed companies to address certain steps, and that is around 40% of the board being women, including those self-identifying as women, one senior board position being held by a woman, including those identifying as female as woman, and one member of the board is from a non-white ethnic minority background. The FCA also suggests board diversity policies should also consider wider diversity aspects such as sexual orientation, socioeconomic background and disability. I'm just going to ask Ebenezer to just put his camera on if it's not, and just share his experience of working at Travellers and being a member of the ACIN, and how this is a positive outcome of the 6 steps that demonstrates that if you do actually put practical efforts in place, change does occur. So Ebenezer, would you like to maybe for 1 or 2 minutes to share your experience of being at Travellers?
Yeah, so personally, I just wanted to start off by saying that I believe the 6 steps for the ACIN's paper should be the blueprint for companies to follow. Just as you referenced, the 3rd step references, the need to recruit now and for the future. I was the first graduate hire of the ACIN in September 2019, along with a colleague of mine. And since then, Travellers has continued to work with the ACIN to hire for their grad program. I've been a benefactor of the ACIN in that recruitment process, because from a very early stage, they gave a lot of support and coaching prior to the assessment centre. And they've been having monthly check-ins with myself and other colleagues that have come through that process. Internally at Travellers, from the minute we've walked in through the door, we've been allocated mentors, we've had senior leadership engagement on a monthly basis, and then we've had a program sponsor as well who's had dedicated support throughout our graduate program and beyond. I've now fortunately completed my grad program as of last year, September. But that support still happens to this day. So I personally feel that companies need to recruit now for the future from a diverse pool of talent. But I also think that they need to provide learning and development opportunities to advance diverse leaders and educate employees on biases. You have to have a workplace culture that's inclusive and accepting. Otherwise, there's no point in bringing diverse talent in. But I also firmly believe that you can't aspire what you can't see. So for an employee that's a member of the minority community, if they look to leaders throughout the organization and they see themselves represented, it communicates that the company honors diversity and sees them as valued employees with a long and happy career path for them there.
Thank you, Ebenezer. So we're going to move on. I'm just conscious of time. This is a point where we, the panel, and me, the facilitator, do less talking. We're going to go to the room first to see if there are any questions based on what you've heard this afternoon in the last hour or so. Any questions in the room? Any comments? Okay. So online, Catherine, my colleague Catherine is taking your questions or points on, online. Any questions coming through as yet? Anybody raising?
We've had a question earlier for Maxine from Richard, who said, really appreciate you sharing your experiences. How has the increased empathy from the events in 2020 resulted in actions within the industry or at your company?
Thank you, Richard. And I did see the question. It's a great one. The empathy did make a difference because people are now a little bit more intentional that we need to do things differently. And what you've seen is that, you know, just get on with it. Let's have these grassroots organizations, these networks, but also make sure we have the leadership driving through the change. So, I mean, the theme for Diving this year is Braver Culture. So you need people who are brave at the top and at the bottom. You need the grassroots to be able to speak up on their experiences. We need our middle managers also to be a little bit more cognizant of how their staff members feel and what they experience. And you have the top saying, this is how I want to drive my culture. This is how I want to change behaviors in my organization. We're seeing more of that. But as I said before, these are small steps forward, and you can't take your foot off the gas. You need to keep driving this thinking through. So our leaders need to be more accountable to themselves. I would start there, as well as to their organizations and certainly to the regulators. You're seeing more of that. They need to be more authentic, and we're seeing more of that. Not 100%. There's some, not all, if you're entirely honest. Some just don't care because they're not affected by it, other than where it's a compliance issue rather than a culture change issue. So I would say within my own organization, I was excited. I've only been at Sompo a year and a half, and I was excited when I joined to see the hiring practices, the engagement of people of color, and this is all types of colors, rainbow colors. And so you could see it on the ground, the increased diversity and the intentional way of engaging with them. Making sure their voices are heard, making sure that there's excellent representation. You see that more. Of course, we have diversity councils and work streams on race and other protected characteristics, which is fantastic. But it is at the end of the day is how you engage people on the subject. And this so-called dial doesn't move until you have the entire organization with you. It is a full in, all in, people in challenge. Just addressing how those people of color, are supported isn't how you deal with this. You need to make sure those who are for, those who are against are included in the discussion, all of us. And even if people agree to disagree, that's a start forward, because dialogue and interaction actually is like miracle working here, because that's how you really move forward. You're not looking necessarily at the past. Of course, you need to own the past, but you're also looking at, the future. How do we sustain it for the future as well, and not go backwards, which is always my worry. And so it's a collective effort. I'm seeing that within my own organization. I'm seeing it across various organizations. I'm involved with ICANN and Rattle. Of course, ACIN is really pushing it and doing a fantastic work with their toolbox. So I'm seeing it, Richard. The empathy is coming through. There's more work still to be done, but I'm pleased with the progress being made.
Thank you, Maxine. I've had a request, and I understand through technical challenges you've not been able to see the panel. So I've just switched to sharing screen so you can see the room and you can see speakers hopefully at this point. Apologies if you're unable to. Catherine, I see there's some more questions in the chat, so please would you share, Catherine, what others have actually been asking. I'm going to keep the questions going for maybe another 5 to 8 minutes, just because sure you're engaged and able to participate as a group.
Okay, we have a question from Francis Goss, who has said, this is controversial, but I've recently had a conversation with a senior leader, not in my company, who questions whether it's right to assume that the murder of George Floyd was racially motivated. He stated that no one really knows someone's motives. I find his view offensive, but any tips on how to respond?
I'm happy to jump in, but let someone speak.
No, I think you're good, Maxine.
Okay, so thanks for that question. And this is a typical distraction. The focus should not be on whether it's George Floyd or, you know, Bob or John. The issue is racism, systemic racism, and that it exists, it's prevalent, and it's slow to change. And within our own organizations and industries, we should be not tolerant of it. We need to be reflective of our society, so the discussion needs to be had. When you have questions on whether it's Black Lives Movement being a political movement, or whether it's George Floyd, was he a criminal or not, that's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. The focus is not be distracted. Let's focus on how we move forward. How do we work collectively going forward on addressing systemic racism within our societies and within our micro-organizations?
I think I'll just add to that as well, Maxine. I think this is why data is also important. I mean, the way we can demonstrate and evidence that there is such a thing as systemic racism is the data, is the statistics. I mean, the proportion of, you know, Black male people in America getting stopped, searched, killed by the police. You can't deny what the stats say, and there's something underneath those stats. So I mean, I would, if it was that person speaking to me, I would be asking them, do they understand the wider, you know, the wider picture, and why, you know, why we can point to this, an incident like this being another example of systemic racism that is rooted in America for God knows how many decades. So I think just to open it up to a more intelligent conversation, and also ask possibly other white colleagues, what do they think about that whole situation? But embracing and bringing people into that conversation, that's an opportunity for me. So yeah, but totally agree. It's a distraction if we just focus on the small point, but it's an opportunity to open up to that wider conversation of systemic racism.
Thank you so much. I'm just really conscious of time, so I'm going to do some housekeeping so we can really get into some really juicy, meaty questions. Just to progress and just demonstrate that we've actually really done due diligence in terms of learning objectives. If you recall, and I'm just going to quickly move to the slides, so bear with me, having to be technically diverse here, but this is all great. This is all the joy of doing things online. So learning objectives, we want to revisit if you're using this for your CPD. Having completed this session, we would like to think that you'd be able to describe what the insurance profession has been doing in terms of response to conversations around DII, the diversity and inclusion. We also would like to think that you can be able to list, identify, describe the ACIN 6 steps to racial inclusion to inform your own personal journey and those of your organisation. We'd also like to think that you're able to now identify and describe, even summarise the FCA Policy Statement 22.3, requirements for certain listed companies. And we'd also like to position you in such a way to identify a personal commitment to equality, diversity, inclusion in your own organisation. So, Taryn, if you just kindly move on to the next slide. As I said, this is a call to action, and if you go on to the next slide, please, you'll see a commitment card for those of you in the room. And also, Catherine will upload for you the commitment card. Taryn, if you just move on to the next slide, we'd like you to think about 3 things you've learned from the session that you didn't know before. We'd also like you to think about 3 things you will do differently as a result of attending this session. We'd also like you to make a commitment of how you'll use the learnings to turn the dial on improving EDI. And finally, as a result of this session, what you're inspired to do. Taryn, if you just move on to the next slide. We want to know what you thought about this session. It helps inform us. It helps inform Inclusion at Lloyd's how successful the session was. Catherine will actually drop into the chat a survey link for you to complete after we finish our Q&A discussion. I want to have enough time for you to really talk to the panel and ask the questions. So that should be in the chat now. I'm going to switch back to the room so you can see the panel. And Catherine, would you kindly just take us through more questions that have come through? Panel, what we'll do is we'll get through as many questions as we can, and maybe 5 minutes before past, I'll call the session to a close and just thank you for your time and invite those online and in the room to thank you for participating. Thank you online and thank you for people in the room for joining us today and just bearing with us with the technical challenges. But I think you'll agree it's been a really interesting discussion. And not only that, we're actually going to leave with some sustainable action and practical steps that can be taken forward. So Catherine, if you'd like to just ask the first question that's in the chat, please, that'd be great.
Yep. How do we effectively engage middle managers, those who sit under the leadership team, so still strategic but slightly more operational, and ensure that they are playing their role in bringing about the change we need?
I'm happy to take this one, if everyone else is.
Yeah, go on.
So this is actually an interesting topic at TMK, and I think in most organisations you'll see a similar thing. I think, obviously, when you have more junior colleagues, the trend is that you see more ethnically diverse colleagues at the junior level, and obviously at the senior level, I think there is more of an appreciation in most organisations that there does need to be a change. So middle management, as the question suggests, is kind of a crucial area because it won't necessarily involve individuals in either of those categories, and essentially it's a bit of a crux because they're the one making a lot of the decisions in the company on a day-to-day basis, and their impact and their influence can have an ultimate effect on things like ethnic diversity. So the one thing that we're focusing on TMK a lot on in terms of tackling middle management is firstly showing the benefits of having ethnically diverse teams that they manage on a day-to-day basis. So, you can, if you just simply Google, you'll find loads and loads of studies which show that teams which are made up of individuals from diverse backgrounds, not just from an ethnicity standpoint, but every other point of diversity, are more high performing on average than teams that consist of individuals who have the same background and the same experiences. So that's the first thing I always say to middle management when I speak to them. As chair of the ethnicity committee at TMK, I say, look, if you have more diverse teams, they're going to perform better, and if they do their jobs better, then it's going to make you look better. Sometimes, look, you have to be honest, and you do have to be a bit more kind of bold in your approach and say, look, people do respond more positively when they know it impacts them directly. That isn't necessarily the approach that should be taken in every instance, because if something doesn't affect you directly, it doesn't mean you shouldn't want to be an advocate for it. But unfortunately, that's the way some people are in the world. And so, again, if you're able to demonstrate to them that there is some intrinsic value that would affect them, I think that's a really great way to get them on board. And I think the other way, really, and again, it kind of draws to the point I made previously, which is driving the narrative. If you have a strong board, if you have a strong exec team, which drive the positive message forward, again, that will trickle down to middle management, and it will make them understand, that this is something that's not going away and it's going to stick around. So they better get on board, otherwise they will, they won't necessarily be in the kind of everyone's best interest. So I think a combination of those couple of things would mean that you're targeting middle management in a more direct way, but you're also kind of taking into consideration that if their higher ups are driving that positive message, then by osmosis they will eventually do the same.
Thanks, Manraj. Can you have the next question, please, Catherine?
Yep, following on from that, we've got a question regarding what do you say to a leader who talks about diversity, inclusion and equality, but who are not willing to share data on demographic representation across the organisation?
I mean, that's
Thanks.
I mean, that's a hard one, Catherine, isn't it? Is leading a horse to water, but not making them drink, sort of thing, really. And I think I think it sort of comes back to some of the earlier points. I think you have to find where the sort of willingness and advocacy actually is in the organisation, because to Maxine's earlier point, it's a bit of a long road, and not everyone in an organisation, around a leadership team table or middle management table or board table or whatever, is necessarily going to move at the same time, at the same pace, in the same way, and therefore, you might actually be going for the wrong person from the get-go. But it's identifying where the advocacy is, and going there first of all, and then building out from there. I think that's the way to build advocacy, and not kind of face into it straight on necessarily, where you might get the immediate resistance.
Sounds also as if this leader is terrified of being held to account for a poor result, which shouldn't be the case. Yes. It is a journey, and it's just saying this is the point that we're at within our company, and having full transparency. This is the DNA of our company, and showing the roadmap for how we want to see our company going forward. It's a shame that they wouldn't want to share information, but you know what? The regulators are coming where you're going to have to be more transparent. You're going to have peer pressure when you're seeing that others are actually doing it, and probably doing it well or doing it increasingly better year on year. That will help drive some of the behaviors. I think you need to call these things out. You need to discuss it. Your leader needs support as well. As long as we're not rewarding bad behaviors, and we're quite guilty of doing that within this industry. So I'll just leave that one there.
Great, thank you, Maxine. Catherine, any other questions?
I've got one for all of the panelists. If you had a magic wand, what is one thing that you would change in the industry?
Who wants to go first?
Go on, guys.
I wonder if I could change two things, and it's all linked to diversity. So I often think that diversity is just a numbers thing, but what we're trying to do all the time is to change the culture, and it's the culture of belonging, it's the culture of equality, hence equity, hence inclusion. And you don't get the benefits or the dividends that diversity can give you unless you truly have those cultures in place. So if I had a magic wand that I can bring that culture about of inclusiveness and equity or equality, then that's what I would do.
Great. Anyone else?
I've got a couple of things as well. I think I don't know whether they're kind of just specific things you switch on and off, so to speak, but one is, and again, I think just touching on something Maxine was saying earlier on, I think you do have to sort of build a culture, back to culture again, a culture of trust in the organisation, that is genuine about everything. So it's a real value that the organisation holds, and therefore that will, within that context, more likely to enable the right meaningful conversations to happen, and to be able to call out, in that environment. So that I'd want to see more of that. And then the second thing is, for me, and I touched on it earlier, really, is to be able to hear the voice of our customers more, and what their needs and wants are, because they, we don't control the customer, and that the customer base is as diverse as anything is, and why is the industry not diverse and inclusive when when our customer base is so diverse? So hearing the voice of the customer and what what we can do more of to support them and their needs and wants in terms of the products and services we offer would be a wish for me.
Certainly for me, I think what I would probably want is the speed at which change is happening. And obviously we've heard from all of the panelists today what sort of things should be done and how we can get there and the voices and the transparency that's required. But I think also if things could be done within the next 6 months, it will be an absolute result for us. But unfortunately, it's something that is going to require not only senior leadership or middle management, but also the employees on the ground as well. Everyone has to be committed towards these goals. So whilst the senior leadership can set the direction, it's down to everybody else in the employee forum to also play their part in making the change as well.
Okay, I will let you, Manraj, answer. Just want to check, anybody in the room got a question? So Manraj, if you would answer, and then we have a question in the room, and then I'll make that our last question. Thanks, Manraj.
Sure. I was just going to say, just kind of following on with what Ebenezer was saying, is I just wish everyone would just listen. As much as we all are listening in this conversation here today, I think a lot of the issues that we've discussed in this conversation here today would be addressed very, very quickly if people just listened, understood, and took the time to actually take in what people are saying, whether that's through understanding their lived experiences, whether that's taking the time to understand the work that different ethnicity groups are doing, or different subgroups, or the ACIN, or whoever it is. I think if people just listened and actually took that 5 minutes out to read that email or understand what is Black History Month, or whatever it is, right? I think that would really help change the conversation very quickly, and as I said, it would act as a real catalyst for change.
That's great. Thanks, Manraj. We have a question in the room. It's nice and loud.
Hi. My question was, I think it's a really informative question, but I'm interested in hearing you share some examples of where you've seen really effective processes or things in place that have helped to improve the culture that some of the people on the call can maybe look to emulate that within our businesses.
Could you hear the question? Yeah. Okay, so please go ahead, panel.
I'll jump in. This is an unusual one. I'll let the others do their take, but I'd say when you see a HR or D&I team that's diverse, you see change because they actually find the whole subject more relatable. And of course, squarely to HR and D&I leaders, that look at yourself in the mirror. If you are going to be preaching, you have to practice. And so you need to make sure that when you try to change culture, change behaviors when the organization, you have to lead by example. And so the organizations which I've seen, and I could think of some that I've seen the change where they've addressed this issue or made D&I objective to within the HR function because it's more for the people than the organization, you do see the change. And so that's not the typical answer you'd give, but I wanted to stick that one in there like an oar.
We got thank you from the floor. Anybody else?
Just to say that when we at the CII, when we sort of established the values of the organisation, which are inclusivity, open community, and innovation, innovative, forward thinking. That was done by everyone, and that I think fostered those values, which I think actually do try to respect what we're all trying to achieve here and speak to that really well. So that was be my tip is to build the values set, if you will, by involving everybody in the organisation in doing so, rather than some special group somewhere in a dark room coming up with something that doesn't relate to anybody.
Thank you, John. And on that note, this is where I ask our guests here in person and those of you online if you would use your emojis to give a round of applause for our panel. So thank you, panel. round of applause for yourselves for contributing and just engaging and bearing with us with the technology. I hope that this has been a really productive, insightful, and a session that enables you and gives you the positioning to have sustainable action for change, positive change. That's what we've endeavoured to do. As the CII, we want to be part of the thought leadership that enables the profession to go on from strength to strength and demonstrate that we represent a very diverse population, both in our London market and globally. And we hope that this has been a really informative and helpful session. So thank you all for your time and thank you all for engaging, and have a really good rest of the dining. Thank you. Bye-bye.